The ghostly conductor wants my soul presented by Absolutely Haunted. Like, comment, and subscribe. We here at Absolutely Haunted would appreciate it, thanks. They say some places are cursed, but what if I told you I've seen the proof with my own eyes? A stretch of railroad, a tragic past, and a horrifying pattern that keeps repeating itself. 3 years, 3 deaths, and last night. The conductor told me I'm next. I work the night shift at a convenience store on the edge of town, right across from the tracks where a train derailed back in 1941, taking countless lives with it. But those souls, they never left. They wander, searching, and they aren't alone. This is the story of the haunted tracks, and why I have only 1 year left before the conductor comes for me. I'm almost certain that whatever is happening is tied to what happened back in 1941. Long before the convenience store stood there, a passenger train met its doom on that very spot. It derailed. Gallantly, catastrophically, flinging metal and bodies into the cold night. A section of the track had vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed it. No one ever figured out how or why for certain. But it was too late when the train hit that gap in the rails. It veered off the tracks, screaming as it went, dragging countless souls into the darkness with it. And maybe, just maybe, not all of them went to the other side. The conductor took the blame, though no one ever proved he was responsible. He had just learned he was being let go, his years of service cast aside, and bitterness festered in his heart. Did he sabotage the tracks in a final act of revenge? No one will ever know for certain. 1 year to the day of the train derailment, he ended his own life, standing on the very same tracks, waiting for the train that would take him away. Was it guilt that led him there? Or something else? I don't have the answers. All I know is that ever since that night, people have been drawn to that cursed stretch of rail, and they never come back. The injuries were horrific, but the deaths, they were beyond measure. For decades, travelers passing through at night have reported eerie encounters, glimpses of shadowy figures near the roadside, pale faces flickering in their headlights. The lost souls of the derailment victims still wandering, dazed, as if trapped between worlds. I saw one just last night. I was outside at the pumps, swapping out the garbage bags, when an unbearable chill crept over me. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something unseen. A wave of fear gripped me so suddenly that I stopped cold, my eyes darting around the lot. Our store sits on the edge of town, a perfect place for trouble. I've always been wary of robbers, but this was different. First I could feel it, and then I saw it. The fear in my body was rising fast, suffocating. Out of the corner of my eye, I had caught movement across the tracks. My breath hitched. A woman in a green dress was climbing the hill on the far side of the railroad tracks. She had only one shoe on, and the other foot dragging limply behind her. In her hand, she clutched an old-fashioned train case, its surface scuffed and worn, like it had been through decades of travel or something far worse. She was sobbing. "Bobby!" She wailed into the night, her voice cracked and desperate. Then I saw it. Blood. A deep, gaping gash split her forehead, and crimson streaked down her pale face, seeping into her eyes. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't even seem to notice. And that's when I realized. She wasn't looking at me. She was searching for someone who wasn't there. She stopped again, her frail body trembling as she lifted her head and cried out into the night. "Bobby!" The name tore from her throat like a dying breath, thick with sorrow, heavy with loss. I should have stayed still. I should have held my breath and let her fade back into the darkness. But I shifted. Just the smallest movement, and her head snapped toward me. Our eyes met. For the first time, I saw her up close, saw the agony swimming in those glazed, blood-streaked eyes. Recognition flickered, human recognition. Not really of me, but of life itself. I knew what she was. Her edges flickered, just the barest amount of transparency to her form. She was one of them, the train victims. She limped forward. "Have you seen Bobby?" Her voice was weak, trembling. "I need to find him. Find..." She reached the middle of the road and stopped, her expression twisting with confusion. Slowly, she turned, looking back the way she had come, as if the answer might be waiting for her in the empty night. Then, almost to herself, she whispered, "Something happened?" It wasn't a question for me. It was for herself, like she was only now realizing that the world she knew was long gone. She stood there, listening. To what? I'll never know. And then, just as suddenly as she had noticed me, she forgot me. Her head dipped, her shoulders sagged, and she turned, limping back toward the tracks as though drawn by some invisible force. Relief crashed over me. I bolted inside, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. My brain scrambled for logic. I told myself that if a customer came, I'd see them. I'd unlock the door. But her? No, I knew exactly what she was, and whatever she needed, whatever she was searching for, I wasn't about to be part of it. It never even crossed my mind that a locked door wouldn't keep something like her out. Hindsight, you know. One night, a local guy stopped by for an iced tea while I was outside checking the gas levels in the tanks. We chatted for a bit, the night calm and quiet, until we both heard the train's horn wailing from the crossing about a quarter-mile away. Then, his voice cut through the air, sharp with fear. "Hey man, you see that?" I turned, and my blood ran cold. There he was, the ghostly conductor, standing stiff on the tracks, his face twisted in agony as the train hurtled toward him. The blinding light swallowed him whole. And then nothing. He was gone. We just stood there, too shaken to speak. I really need to find another job. You will understand why I say this when you hear the worst part about having this job, and why I believe the conductor has set his sights on me. I have personally witnessed 3 people come to horrible ends at that spot in the tracks, and no one knows why. There have been many others over the years. The place has a reputation for it now. But 3 years ago, I started working the night shift, and each year someone has ended themselves on a night when I have been working. Each death a year apart to the day. The first event occurred when I was working one of my first night shifts. A guy came through the door, wearing a tan pair of cargo shorts and a white t-shirt, dressed just like a lot of my customers. He was friendly, telling me about how busy he had been lately, and the work he had planned for tomorrow, because he and his wife had just purchased a house a couple of streets over. He purchased a pack of smokes and a soda. Saying goodbye, I watched him walk out the door. He came to a stop right in front of the big plate glass window of the store. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another customer lingering. But then I noticed the way he stood, completely still, his gaze locked on something across the road by the tracks. I followed his line of sight, my stomach twisting with unease. There was nothing there, just the tracks, a long row of trees behind them, and beyond that, a vast empty field swallowed in darkness. Then, to my growing horror, he raised his arm and waved. At what? I pressed closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass. This was getting weird. I was stunned when he set his soda down on the hood of his car and started walking across the parking lot, completely ignoring the gas pumps. Without even a glance at the road, he crossed over to the other side, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. There was something off about the way he moved, tiku, slow, stiff, like he was in a trance. A chill crawled up my spine, and I felt a tightness in my chest. Something was very wrong. Every instinct in me screamed to stop him, but I couldn't bring myself to move. He reached the tracks, stepping onto them without hesitation, and stood there in the middle, staring down the line to the right. I heard the train horn blast from the intersection a quarter-mile away. My heart leaped into my throat. What was he doing? Didn't he hear it? Panic shot through me as I rushed toward the door. My shirt caught on a nail in the counter, and for a moment, I was trapped, struggling to tear myself free. I finally yanked the door open, my breath ragged with fear, bolted out into the night. The train's horn blared relentlessly, its sound vibrating through the air. I don't know if the engineer saw the man or not, but as the massive lights of the locomotive cut through the darkness, they illuminated his face. I could see his expression clearly, but it was empty, vacant, utterly blank. It didn't make sense. The train's brakes screeched, desperately fighting to stop, but anyone who knows trains knows they can't stop on a dime. Time seemed to stretch, but in a matter of seconds, it was over. screamed, the sound raw and gut-wrenching. I had never witnessed anything so horrific in my life. My legs buckled beneath me, and I crumpled to the ground, overwhelmed by a wave of terror and nausea. The tears and vomit came together as I sank into the horror of what I had just seen. I struggled up from the ground and made my way to the phone. I called 911, and within minutes the parking lot was covered in policemen and an ambulance. The coroner arrived shortly after. The neighborhood descended upon the parking lot with everyone wanting to know what happened. My boss arrived and sent me home. He could see I was traumatized. It took me days to be able to return to work. I gave my statement before they let me leave, describing how strange the guy had been acting, what I'd witnessed, and what I'd done. One of the officers, closing his notepad, suggested he had probably planned it all. I asked him, if he planned it, then why did he leave his soda on the car hood, like he was coming back for it? And why did he go on about all the plans he had for tomorrow? The officer shrugged and said, maybe he said that to keep you from getting suspicious, to stop you from trying to intervene. I didn't buy it, but I let it go. There was no point in arguing. Almost to the exact day, a year later, the girl came through that night. I was in the cooler, stocking shelves, when I heard it. The screeching of the train's wheels, the blaring horn. The sound hit me like a punch to the gut, and in an instant, I was transported back to the night of the first man. I didn't know who it was, but I knew exactly what had happened. I yanked the cooler door open, just in time to see Clara crumple to the floor, her body trembling in terror. A man burst through the door behind her, his face a mask of pure horror. His hands were shaking as he pressed his cell phone to his ear, frantically dialing 911. The panic in his eyes told me everything. I knew something was horribly wrong. Clara's voice trembled as she stuttered through her words, both of them talking over each other in a frantic rush. But amidst their chaos, I could make out the nightmare unfolding. Something had happened out there. Something they couldn't explain. Clara stated later to the police. The girl was not very talkative. She bought herself a fountain pop and a package of snack nuts. She had walked outside and disappeared around the side of the building. Clara thought she probably lived in the neighborhood back there as she came in quite a lot. The girl was one of our regular customers. The guy at the pump started talking, his voice trembling as he recalled what he saw. He mentioned how she'd left the store, casually disappearing around the corner. But then, something in his tone shifted. His eyes went wide with a mix of confusion and dread as he continued. He said he'd stopped paying attention while he was getting his gas, but when he finally looked up, his stomach dropped. She wasn't heading to the houses anymore. No, she was walking straight into the road, her figure moving as if pulled by some unseen force. And that's when he realized she wasn't walking at all. She was stumbling, like something was wrong, like she couldn't even feel the world around her. He told me she didn't say a word. She just crossed the road, moving like she was in a trance, heading straight for the tracks. He turned away, distracted by his credit card, but then, the sound. The train horn, a deafening blast, ripping through the night from down the road. He said the next thing he saw made his blood run cold. The train was barreling towards her, its lights cutting through the darkness like a predator. And then, he saw her. She was lying there, motionless, lying on the tracks. His voice cracked as he sobbed, recounting the moment. It took her head, he whispered, choking on the words, his hands shaking as he relived it. His face contorted in terror, like the memory was clawing at him, never letting go. We again had to turn over our surveillance camera footage that showed exactly what Clara and the guy from the pumps had reported. The whole situation played out pretty much just like the first, except this time it was Clara that had to go home. Clara never returned, said she could not face it. 2 days ago marked the anniversary of the last two, and for a moment, I considered not coming into work. I knew what was going to happen. I just knew. Sure enough, I was standing outside, watching a pickup truck pull into the lot. An older man, wearing camo, stepped out and started walking toward the store. But then, he stopped. His eyes went blank, that same vacant, empty look. The kind of expression you only see on someone who's not really there. Someone who's not in control of themselves anymore. My heart sank. I knew this wasn't going to end well. The moment I saw it, I didn't hesitate. Every ounce of instinct screamed at me to act. I grabbed my phone, dialing the police with trembling hands, my voice urgent as I relayed what was happening. I barely heard the dispatcher as I bolted out of the store, running full speed toward the parking lot. I didn't stop, not even for a second. I crossed the road in a blur, my heart pounding in my chest. He was standing there, frozen, staring up the tracks, as if in a trance. I could hear the train's horn blaring, the sound growing louder with each second. The lights from the locomotive flashed in the distance, and I saw the train racing toward the crossing, its momentum unstoppable. "Get off the tracks!" I screamed, my voice raw with panic. But he didn't even flinch. Not once. His eyes didn't leave the tracks. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. And that's when the true horror of it all sank in. The sirens were growing louder, but the train had already barreled through the intersection. Time was slipping away. Without thinking, I sprang into action, lowering my shoulder and slamming into the guy from the side, just like I used to when I played football, taking down a quarterback. The force of my hit sent him sprawling, off the tracks and onto the grass between the tracks and the trees. But he didn't react, not even a blink. He was like a ghost, his eyes vacant and distant. Then, without warning, he sprang to his feet with unnatural speed, his movements jerky and erratic. In the blink of an eye, he darted toward the trees that lined the tracks, disappearing into the shadows, like he was never there at all. I stood there, breathless, heart racing, unable to process what I had just witnessed. The cops arrived just as the massive locomotive thundered toward us. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he had made it out alive. But my blood turned to ice when I saw him. He was perched in the tree. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. It was impossible, insane. He looked like a twisted silhouette against the ski, his form unnaturally still, as if frozen in time. And then, without any warning, he jumped, he leapt from that tree and into the path of the speeding train. I watched in horror as the the front of the locomotive collided with him, a sickening crunch of metal and bone. My gut churned, my throat clenched, and I screamed in pure frustration. Everything I had done, everything I tried, had failed. This time, there was no need to provide video. The police had seen it all with their own eyes, standing helpless on the other side of the tracks, unable to stop the nightmare unfolding before them. The next night, I went out to change the trash bags at the pumps, trying to shake off the unease that always crept up on me when the sun went down. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, like a whisper. Then, unmistakable. Laughter. It echoed through the night, high-pitched and mocking, like the sound of something not quite human. It came from the direction of the tracks. My blood froze. I looked over, my heart pounding, praying I was just imagining it. But the tracks, empty! Yet as I stood there, frozen in place, figures began to emerge from the tree line across the tracks. People, but not real people. Their movements were slow, stiff, as if they were dragging themselves toward the rails, their bodies distorted and unnatural. A thick, ghostly fog swirled around them, curling up like fingers trying to claw their way back from some other world. The laughter grew louder, more frantic, and it felt like it was coming from everywhere. My breath caught in my throat, and my hands shook as I watched, unable to tear my eyes away, terrified of what would happen next. I stood there, gasping for air, my chest tight with panic. The fear coursing through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. A cold, suffocating grip that stole the breath right from my lungs. They stood there, staring at me, their laughter echoing around me like nails scraping against a chalkboard. It was maddening, the sound, high-pitched, sharp, like 1,000 mocking voices all at once. And then, the conductor emerged from the fog. His face was a mask of death, eyes hollow and endless. He didn't speak, but his bony finger pointed directly at me. And I knew what it meant. I was next. His eyes burned with silent malice, and I could feel the weight of his unspoken words crushing me. He knew I had tried to help the last one. He didn't like that. The laughter stopped so abruptly, it was as if someone had flipped a switch. Silence enveloped the scene, thick and suffocating. They all turned as one, their movements eerily synchronized, and began retreating into the tree line. No words, just that chilling, inhuman laugh, now replaced by the almost silent sound of their footsteps disappearing into the darkness. But even as they vanished, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, watching, waiting for their turn. And for mine. The conductor remained frozen, his unwavering gaze locked onto mine. My heart plummeted as he slowly raised a single finger. One finger pointing straight at me. One. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Somehow I knew, 1 year. 1 year, and I would be next. The terror washed over me, paralyzing my thoughts and my body. But as the dread gripped me, a flicker of defiance sparked within. Too bad he didn't know. In 1 year, I wouldn't be anywhere near this place. I'd be 1,000 miles away. I was leaving this cursed place for good, heading back home to the Carolinas. I'd had enough of these twisted, relentless, weird Midwest ghosts. No more. But even as I made my plan, a chilling thought crept in. What if they followed me there?